Welcome to Rocket Science. Here you get to see experiments. You can watch them if you feel like, but better yet, we try to make them so that you can do the same experiments at home. Today we're going to be using a chemical. It's something that people blame on the greenhouse effect. It's something that's in your breath when you breathe out. It's something that makes the tiny bubbles that are in soda pop. And it's something that plants breathe in through their leaves to stay alive. This particular something, it can be in a solid form or it can be in a gas form. It's really hard to make it be a liquid. There's some of it in there. And I can give you a hint about what it's like by blowing on it. It makes fog. It's 109 degrees below zero, and ice cream vendors use it to make their ice cream really cold. And you might have already guessed that the chemical is carbon dioxide, and in its solid form, people call it dry ice. Dry ice is reasonably hard, and you can pick it up. They call it dry ice because it doesn't drip. You can see some fog coming off. The carbon dioxide is invisible, so you can't see that. And it never does create a liquid. Since it's 109 below zero, you don't want to touch it for very long. You can pet it and your hand won't stick because it's always turning directly from a solid into a gas. So it pushes your hand away. It creates a layer between you and its surface. Now, even though you can pet it, if you put your finger on there for more than about 5 seconds, you can get something called frostbite. Frostbite, it happens when your skin freezes. The cells in your skin develop crystals. And the crystals puncture all the good stuff that keeps your cell alive, and the cells die. It's kind of like if you touch a red hot piece of metal, kills the skin. Dry ice can also kill your skin. So you don't want to touch it for very long. Dry ice, since it makes carbon dioxide, you have to be careful where you're using it. If you have the carbon dioxide in a very small room, it'll fill up the room and there'll be no oxygen for you to breathe, and you can faint and die. So use it in a well-ventilated area. So the basic problems with dry ice is it's really cold, you have to be careful not to touch it for very long, and it produces carbon dioxide gas, which can force the oxygen out of a small area. In a big room, you're perfectly fine. In our science classes, we like to use crazy stories to get the kids motivated and to get their creativity going. In our stories, we also have Jack and Jill and the evil Mr. Fred. Evil Mr. Fred has helpers we call minions, and Jack and Jill also have various friends in their parts of the story. In this particular story, we'll be out in the ocean, and evil Mr. Fred has found an island out there that was abandoned. So he decided to build a castle on this island. There's the whole island. And he had his minions start cementing rocks together to build a castle tower. Evil Mr. Fred liked to be on top of everything so he could watch and make sure that everybody was doing their jobs. So he would stand on top of this tower. There he is. And make sure that they were doing what he told them to do. The minions aren't really bright, but at least they follow directions. And one day the minions were out there goofing around as usual. And evil Mr. Fred had been experimenting, and he created some soap bubbles that when he blew them, when they popped, they would explode. And his minions would be down there, and they'd see the soap bubbles, and they'd go chasing after them. Of course, the minions wanted to pop the soap bubbles. But as soon as they did, kablamo, the poor minion would get all blown up. Evil Mr. Fred thought this was the funniest thing that ever was. But the poor minions from thereafter became deathly afraid of soap bubbles. Now, minions are creatures that naturally find some way to get into some trouble. And evil Mr. Fred wanted to keep them busy. So he called the Acme store of everything and ordered a whole bunch of shovels and told them to start digging. The minions started digging underneath the castle. And as they did, they discovered a chamber down there. They came up and they said, "Boss, boss, there's a chamber down there." He said, "Oh, well, that's very good. Just keep digging." And they kept digging some more. And over a period of time, they discovered not just one chamber, but 7 chambers. And they tunneled from one to the other, and hoping to find treasure. But alas, all they found was dirt and rocks. And it kept them so busy that they couldn't get into any other trouble at all. Now, evil Mr. Fred knew that there was some place on the island that the minions shouldn't go, and he forbade them to ever go there. And it was over here on this side of the island. There was an ice cream factory. And minions love ice cream. And they just kept tunneling and ended up tunneling right into the ice cream factory. And they said, "Whoa, this is great. We can sneak in here at night and eat as much ice cream as we want and go back out. Nobody will ever know." Now, of course, somebody did know, because when you eat their ice cream, it's gone. The people at the ice cream factory thought the minions were sneaking in at night from the outside on the ground. So they put a big fence around it. They put minefields around it. They put guard dogs and towers on top with machine guns. And still, the ice cream kept disappearing, and they had no idea how it was going away. Evil Mr. Fred didn't even know that the minions were doing this. Now, once they were done with this, evil Mr. Fred said, "Wow, this is going to make the world's best dungeon. What a great place. Now I've got to have somebody to kidnap and put in there." And as luck would have it, Jack and Jill happened to have been swimming around the planet at that time, and they came across the island and walked up on it, and they saw evil Mr. Fred's tower. And they said, "Uh-oh, this is a nice spot to rest, but I'm not too sure about this." And evil Mr. Fred sent out his minions with their baseball bats and said, "Minions, go get them." And Jack and Jill were all tired out. The minions ran over there, threatened them with their baseball bats, and caught Jack and Jill. Next thing you know, evil Mr. Fred said, "Perfect time to test out our dungeon." So he had the minions build a cage near the bottom of the tunnel. Steel bars, locked doors, and he put into the cage Jack and Jill. There's Jack's eyes. There's Jill's eyes. And Jill has infinitely long hair. Her hair went from chamber to chamber through the whole series of tunnels and out and around the world. Now evil Mr. Fred had them locked inside, and he said, "Oh, life just doesn't get better than this. My 2 enemies locked down in the dungeon. They'll never escape." He said, "But just to make sure, I think I'll add a few things. I'll be a little helpful for them. I'll put a bridge across this first chamber so they can have an easier walk if they happen to get out. But I'll make flames all around the bridge, so if they try to walk across, they'll get burned up." Then he said, "In the next chamber, I think I'll put a dragon. Big dragon here. And it'll be a sleeping dragon. But this dragon is only dangerous when it's asleep. If you try to approach it, ka-snap, it'll swallow you up. However, when it's awake, it's a nice dragon, and you can walk right across its tongue. However, there's only one way to make it wake up. The dragon sleeps on a whole pile of gold coins. And the only way to wake this dragon up is to make the coins scream. So they'll probably never get past that. In the next chamber, There's a 100-foot-long python, a huge man-eating snake. Like this. There he is with his tongue sticking out. And below the python, there's a pool of water. And the python will challenge anybody that comes by. He says, nobody gets to go by unless you can swim through boiling water. It has to be bubbling and smoke coming out of it, and then I'll let you go by. Otherwise, I'll eat you up. If you do manage to get past the python, then you come to another room. In this room, there's bright lights and video cameras. And evil Mr. Fred and his minions watch. Anybody that tries to walk through there, if they see them, he'll send his minions down with his baseball bats to go and get them. If they manage to get past that, in this room, there's a perfectly flat floor, smooth as glass. However, there's some super microphones in there. Anybody that makes the slightest noise as they walk across that floor will get caught by the evil Mr. Fred. In the next room, what could be more devious? Evil Mr. Fred has a whole line of minions just standing there all day long with their baseball bats, poised, ready to smack anybody that comes by. And in the last room, there's some airtight doors with really good locks on them. The whole chamber is sealed. And he figured that nobody would ever be able to get through those doors. Now Jack and Jill were inside. And they thought, wow, how are we ever going to get out of this mess? And Jill took a hairpin out of her hair and started to goof around with the lock on the cage. And Jack said, why do you even bother? Even if you get the door open, we're never going to get past that fire. And Jill said, oh, well, we'll see. And she kept fooling around, and next thing you know, click, the door opened. And Jack said, I think this is a trap. And Jill said, well, let's look around. And they discovered the tunnel that the minions had dug into the ice cream factory. So they climbed into it, went in there and discovered all this ice cream. They said, wow, this is great, and they ate some ice cream. They also discovered in the ice cream factory lots and lots of dry ice. If you were Jack and Jill, how would you escape from this island and these dungeons? People always want to know, where do you get the dry ice? They want to do the experiments because they're a whole bunch of fun. So if you look in the yellow pages under regular ice, then you can scan through and find the ones that also sell dry ice. You might also look under welding supply, because sometimes around here, the welding supply people sell dry ice as well. And in some cases, they even sell it at grocery stores. Now, there's other ways to get dry ice. For instance, on one of the aircraft carriers, the Navy guys discovered that there's a way to very quickly cool off their beer. Certain kinds of fire extinguishers have carbon dioxide in them, like this guy right here, and they're very heavy steel tanks, 800 psi inside, pounds per square inch, and in this case, the carbon dioxide is truly a liquid. And you can squirt it through a valve and through a rubber hose. Well, the Navy guys found out that if you put their beer into a cardboard box and pointed this kind of fire extinguisher at the beer, they could cool it off really fast. And in the process, they made some dry ice. Of course, there was a problem when a fire broke out on the aircraft carrier and all the fire extinguishers were empty, but that's beside the point. Now, this one that says carbon dioxide on it is the kind you would want to use to do this sort of a demonstration. If you happen to pick one of the other kinds, the far more common kind, this one says ABC on it. It has a powder inside. and it's usually distinguished by a pressure gauge on there. This one won't make dry ice. It'll make a big cloud of yellowish powder that sticks on everything, and you'll spend the next 2 or 3 years trying to clean your classroom or your house up. So this one you don't want to use. We'll set this guy aside. Now, when I turn this on, liquid carbon dioxide is going to go through the hose, but it can't stay liquid very long because the pressure decreases and it flashes into a gas. As it flashes, it actually gets colder and colder and colder. And it gets to the point where it makes some solid carbon dioxide. I'm going to fire it at this black tabletop, and you can see what it does. And these frosty little piles are little piles of dry ice. Now, if you want to, you can put a pillowcase over something like this, put on some earmuffs, and fire the whole cylinder into it, and you'll get a big old blob of kind of soft, squishy dry ice. It doesn't last for very long, but that's one way you can make dry ice. Once you have your dry ice, and do remember that you have to be 18 years old to buy it at the store, then you can start doing some experiments. Just a hammer and a screwdriver will do the job. This particular slab is very soft. It sat around at the dry ice store probably for a long time before they sold it, so it breaks real easily. For our first experiment, we put it in a fish tank. And if you don't have a fish tank at your house, you can use a cardboard box and line it with a plastic big garbage bag so that none of the gas can escape. Our piece of dry ice has been sitting in there for a while, and the tank should be filled with carbon dioxide. The block is 109 below zero. But if you stick your hand inside, if you try this at home, you'll find out that it just barely even feels cool. And that's because any kind of a gas is a really good insulator. Now, if we want to find out where the gas is, we could try blowing some bubbles in there. Usually if you blow a bubble out in the air, it falls to the ground. Look at this guy that's in the tank. Wink. He's floating around. Turns out that carbon dioxide is a whole lot heavier than air. It's more dense. So that bubbles filled with air will float on it. And if you wiggle your finger by a bubble, it creates air currents, so the bubble will follow it along. If we blow bubbles right into the tank, we might be able to get them to sink down through it. There goes one. You got one sitting on the dry ice. And in just that short time, part of that bubble froze solid. They leave little shells of frozen bubble on the surface of the dry ice. Now, it's kind of hard to tell exactly where the carbon dioxide is, but flame is just like us. A flame breathes like a person. It breathes oxygen to stay alive, and we eat food to stay alive. A flame, in this case, eats melted wax. And we need heat to stay alive. If you make us really cold, we'll die. And if you make a flame cold, it'll die too. So when we put the flame down into the tank, it's probably going to die. And will it die because it gets too cold? Or will it die because it runs out of oxygen? Let's see. Boink. Right there is where it died. At this point, we're so far from the dry ice, it probably didn't die because it was too cold. It probably died because it ran out of oxygen. You look at the cigarette lighter, the flame is right on the metal. As I push it down, the flame goes up into the air. Because it can't get enough oxygen down there where the carbon dioxide is. If I go too far, boink, it goes out. So carbon dioxide is a great thing for putting out fires. Of course, that's why they make fire extinguishers. Dry ice loves water. The carbon dioxide, as soon as it goes into water, the water wants to jump into the carbon dioxide wants to jump into the water. When the water gets carbon dioxide in it, it does something unusual. We're going to take this block of dry ice and smack it one, make some littler pieces, and we'll put a piece in a cup, like that, put the rest back in the tank. And we're going to put some water in the cup. And we'll use a little bit, let's use some hot water first. It's about a little warmer than body temperature. Pour our water in there. And immediately the water jumps into the carbon dioxide gas, cools off, and makes fog. And fog, when it's up higher, we call clouds. So now we have a layer of clouds in our fish tank. Now, if I put the cup down in the bottom, some of the dry ice, fog, becomes ground fog. So that we have a layering effect. Clouds up here, fog down there, and a little bit of clear air in the middle. If you live in an area that's a valley, this sometimes happens in valleys, where a cap of cold air comes over the top of the valley and traps all the smog inside. And in this case, we've got a whole bunch of fog trapped inside and carbon dioxide. And to give you an idea of how heavy carbon dioxide is, how dense it is, we're going to make an earthquake. This is going to be a side-to-side earthquake. Here. So we just let it slosh. Now you can see it's just like you sliding back and forth in your bathtub. The carbon dioxide can slosh back and forth just like the water in the tub. Now you can see that that block of dry ice in there is making lots of bubbles. And if you look real closely at it, you might notice that the bubbles are silvery and they're white inside. It forms fog almost instantly. Dry ice is always turning into a gas. They call it sublimation. And the gas usually just diffuses into the air and you don't think much about it. However, if you trap that gas with something, it does something unusual. It's kind of like a balloon. We have some air trapped in this balloon, kind of like the solid carbon dioxide. When I stretch the neck, the gas escapes and it makes the balloon vibrate. The same way, when you trap gas under the edge of a piece of dry ice, the gas will want to get by. And if just resting a piece of metal on the surface will make it you push straight down, it can get out without being trapped so much, so you don't get so much noise. And of course it works better if the metal is warm than if it's cold. At home you can try all kinds of metals to see what happens. You can try a screwdriver, see what happens with that. This is steel, this one is aluminum. Aluminum conducts heat really well. This quarter is a mixture of nickel and copper, and it can spin pretty good. Here's a nickel, which is also nickel and copper, and that'll scream. Newer pennies are a mixture of copper and zinc, and the older pennies before 1983 are solid copper. And a dime is also copper and nickel, but really small. You can even try a hammer if you have one. Or scissors. Those are stainless steel. They don't conduct heat very well at all. Well, try all sorts of things. You can try plastics or glass, whatever you have laying around your house, to see how to make the nice screaming sounds out of it. Since dry ice is always turning into a gas, you can put it on a surface that's reasonably smooth. You try to scoot it around, and it doesn't scoot very well. But the surface that it's resting on is slowly going away. And after a while, it becomes more and more flat, and it will coast. You've created a hovercraft. And if there's any moisture in the air or moisture on the table, you get nice streamers of fog around it. And if you spin it, you get a spinning thing. So at home you can try various surfaces and see how it works. You can try it on your kitchen floor, on the tabletops, whatever you have around it's reasonably smooth, and create a hover thing. You can also try different sizes to see if a little one works better than a big one. If we take our case here and try to slide a little one, will it work as good as a big one? Sometimes people like to make a pot, a bubbling pot for Halloween, a cauldron. And there was a Halloween party once where they had a big bucket and they had apples floating in the water. And the deal was you had to put your hands behind your back and reach in and grab the apples with your teeth. So a person would be trying to grab those apples and the apples float on the surface. Then somebody said, oh, well, I got an idea. They ran over and they put some dry ice in the tank, which made it look really cool. And the guy was still bobbing for the apples, but he didn't realize that the oxygen was being pushed out of the tank. So as he was bobbing for the apples, he got lightheaded, became a little dizzy, and fainted headfirst into the tank. And somebody there said, oh man, that guy's just joking around. Look at him, he's trying to fool us. He didn't realize that he was drowning. Luckily, somebody finally pulled him out and gave him some artificial respiration, and he was okay. So you got to watch out that when you're using dry ice in small enclosed spaces, make sure there's some oxygen for yourself. In another case, they were using dry ice and hot water to make fog for a play. And the fog was just great. It was rolling across the table. In that case, it was rolling across the stage. And the actors were out here doing their thing. But down below the stage are the orchestra members. And the clarinet player was the first to go. Not enough oxygen, keeled over. and the oboe player and a few others. So they had to shut down the play because they didn't have enough air to breathe. Now if you watch, you'll see that the bubbles are going through the tank, and it can be kind of interesting. Once I had a whole bunch of dry ice left over, and that night my kids said, "Oh Dad, you got to see what this is doing." Went into the bathroom and they put the dry ice in the toilet, and it added soap to it. You add a few more pieces of dry ice. Makes more fog. And before long, you've got bubbles creeping out of your toilet. And if you slash them, it bleeds fog. Like that. And everybody wants to know, gee, wouldn't it be great if you could make the bubbles change colors? What would happen if you put some food coloring in the water? Would the bubbles change the same color as the food coloring? Well, we got to try this out and see. We have green. So pour a little green in there. That's about as green as you'd want it. Now we'll see if we get green bubbles. Unfortunately, it's not green enough. And I can't recommend strongly enough that you don't try this with latex paint at home, because it'll make a really big mess. There'll be colored bubbles, all right, but you're going to be there a while cleaning it up. Okay, for this part of the experiment, we want to see what happens when we put some dry ice in a bottle and put a balloon on top. So we have to break up the dry ice. You can use whatever you have at home to smack it. Try to get it small enough so that it can fit into the bottle. And we'll just take some pieces and put them in our bottle. We're getting a fair amount in there. You never know how much it's going to take. When you go to the dry ice store, they might ask you, do you want pellets or slabs? Because you can get the dry ice in the shape of pellets. That'll work just as good as the slabs for all these experiments as well, if that's all they have. That looks like about the right amount. We can put a balloon on top of the bottle. You're going to have to really stretch the balloon because you want it to go beyond that rib in the neck, all the way down to the bottle part. Then we can wait a little bit. Now we can see how fast it makes carbon dioxide gas. But we're impatient. We would like it to go faster. We're Americans. We want instant gratification. So we're going to add some warm water to the bottle. And this means we got to try and get our balloon off again. There we go. We're going to add some water to it. And we'll put our balloon on top. And I'll kind of hold around the bottom so it doesn't leak too much. I can hear it hissing. It's leaking a little bit, but I think it's going in a lot faster than it's coming out. Yes! So now we know that you can inflate a balloon with dry ice. Okay, when we last left them, Jack and Jill had managed to get out of the cage. They saw the bridge over the fire and realized they couldn't get across. Then they discovered the tunnel that the minions had dug into the ice cream factory. And they found the fudge bars and some dry ice. So they got some heavy gloves they found in there, took out the dry ice, and they brought a bucket of water along with them and whatever else they happened to find, maybe even a little bit of soap, and ran back down the tunnel until they got to where the fire was. Then they threw some dry ice into the lake of fire, and the dry ice turned into a carbon dioxide gas, rose up, and extinguished the fire. Then Jack and Jill ran quickly over the bridge because it was really hot and ran up and saw the dragon sitting on the whole pile of coins. And they didn't know what this dragon was, but they saw all those gold coins. And Jack said, "Oh boy, gold coins." And Jill said, "Shh, you'll wake the dragon." And Jack grabbed some of the coins and put them in his pocket. And he accidentally spilled some in along with the dry ice, and they started to scream. And the dragon woke up. And Jill said, "Oh no, that's it for us." The dragon said to them, "Well, hello, how are you today?" And Jack and Jill said, "What kind of a weird dragon is this?" And the dragon said, "You may pass." So Jack and Jill walked right across its teeth and its tongue and went into the next part of the tunnel. And they said, "Wow, that's a weird dragon." Then they came to the python, hanging from the ceiling. And below the python was a pool. And Jack and Jill said, "Uh-oh, pythons, they might eat people." And Jack said, "Maybe we can get him to eat a piece of dry ice." So Jack was trying to throw dry ice to the python to get the python to eat it. But the python didn't want to eat it, and the pieces fell into the pool. And the pool was bubbling and fogging. And Jack and Jill said, "Oh well, let's give it a try." So they jumped in and swam across as fast as they could. And the python said, "Have a nice day." And Jack and Jill said, "Ooh, what a weird snake." And then they went around the tunnel and they peered into the next room and they saw these really bright lights. And they looked up and they saw some lenses. And they figured, uh-oh, cameras. What are we going to do now? Somebody's going to see us. And Jill said, "I got an idea." So they dropped some dry ice into the water and filled the whole room up with fog. When the room was completely fogged up, Jack and Jill snuck through, and nobody even saw them. Then they came to the perfectly flat floor. They had no idea what this was all about. They could see something poking out, but they didn't know that they were microphones. And Jill said, "Cool, really flat, I like this." So she put some dry ice on the floor, 2 pieces, 1 for each foot, stood on them, and Jack gave her a little shove, and she just silently glided across the floor. And Jack did the same himself, and they made it past that one. No alarms went off. But then, there they were, minions with baseball bats. And Jack and Jill said, "Uh-oh, I don't think there's any escaping these guys. They look mean." And so they said, "Oh well, maybe we can make them laugh." So they took some water and they put in their dry ice, made a little fog, but the minions didn't laugh. Then they threw in some soap, and they said, "Well, everybody loves soap bubbles. The minions will love this." They made soap bubbles. Next thing you know, all the minions were running and screaming and pushing, trying to get out of that room as fast as they could. And all Jack and Jill heard was a lot of cries as the minions left them alone in the chamber. So then Jack and Jill said, strange creatures those are. And they came up to the last room. The minions had already gone through. And the minions had stacked rocks behind the last door. And Jack and Jill were able to get through the first door, but there's no way they could get this last door open. So they said, oh well. They left all their dry ice and their water in the bottom of the chamber. And Jack said, well, nothing else to do. So he poured all the water on the dry ice, and Jack and Jill went out and closed the back door. And they thought, well, now what are we going to do? We're still trapped inside. We can't get out. And while they were thinking, they kind of wandered back down to where the minions were. A little while later, something very explosive happened. The pressure in that room got higher and higher and higher. And when it blew up, it was such a huge explosion, it left a giant crater. And the entire castle and the minions and the evil Mr. Fred flew so high into the air, they were never seen again. And everybody lived happily ever after, except evil Mr. Fred, and maybe even his minions.